Has an image like this ever bothered you? What about this one? Any of these? Anything? I'm going to assume, for a good chunk of you, the answer is along the lines of, yes, at some point in time, images similar to those did unsettle me somewhat. Maybe they still do. Warped faces, empty hallways, places that look real occupied by things that really don't. Sometimes to an extent so comical it almost loops back around to being creepy, which is, of course, by design. The surrealist and sinister breed of art is dedicated to getting under your skin. These are images designed to make you feel just a little uncomfortable, occupying the uncanny space between safety and concern. However, for a lot of us as we've grown older, that intended effect never seems to strike the same chord. So how come? Firstly, your brain may not have any fear response to this stimulus because nothing about it is actually registering to you as scary or threatening. Your brain can safely engage with the medium and maintain a level of rationality, allowing you to draw a very clear line between what is a tangible threat and what is a spooky internet video or someone's cool, weird portraiture. The best of this work is often designed with an emphasis on subtlety so that its more eerie qualities aren't immediately present. Some media requires steady contemplation, and the process of letting it stew in your mind is what draws out its more disturbing qualities. However, due to this, it also makes surface-level interpretation easier to disregard. There's nothing sinister about a woman smiling, there's nothing sinister about a made-up monster in the woods. They're not real. Ergo, there is no need to think more on them, and therefore won't cause much in the way of unease. Or maybe the reason is you just don't have the right context to find something like this disturbing in any way. You've never been, for instance, late, leaving an after-school club in the dead of winter, and had to wander down the imposingly massive halls, intended for crowds of people all on your own, in the halogen glow of flickering overhead box lights. You've never felt that creeping concern that there might be someone you don't know inside your house, inside your room, the source of every audible creak and groan, and they're just waiting for you to peek out from behind the covers and look them in the eye before they make their presence known. These and similar experiences are often where we establish our relationship with the wider world. We gain awareness on how vulnerable we can be and what could pose a potential threat to us. We often abhor isolation for the most part because then the only person who can keep you safe is yourself. But if you've never truly been alone, then you won't have a thorough understanding of that feeling and how quickly it can make your blood turn cold. I'd like to hope that the people watching this video don't fit within these first two categories, and if you do, please, go enjoy some more creepy experiences. It's genuinely good for your brain, as I'll mention later. But if you're still not bothered by these otherworldly arts, then it's probably because of the last reason that I care to mention. Maybe you've just seen it all before. Like me, you were probably raised in part by the internet. You got those chain emails that would threaten to kill you if you didn't send them to 5 people. You played the maze game firsthand. You bore witness to roaming horrors back when the internet was called the Wild West, before these things fell out of fashion, and they just don't really affect you anymore. People probably aren't going to fall for Smile Dog in the 2020s. The internet is no longer ambiguous enough. There's less mystery to how it all works, where all the information comes from. And of course, it's now almost entirely in the grasp of massive corporations hell-bent on regulation and censorship to make their platforms more palatable to advertisers. However, before that happened, it was a free-for-all. Not only was it concerningly easy to stumble across disturbing content, but the combination of freedom of access and lack of preconception meant essentially the creation of contemporary folklore spread and perpetuated by curious and slightly traumatized children in school playgrounds, leading to droves of attention, encouraging perpetuation of a myth that surprisingly few people had the critical thought capacity to wave away as clickbait or a hoax. Needless to say, these stories kept popping up over and over again, at least until the general populace developed a better understanding of the web. Maybe the average forum user simply got smarter, although it's not some revolutionary statement to suggest that prolonged or continuous exposure to a specific kind of horror numbs the senses. The amygdala, essentially your brain's fear nexus, will send rapid signals throughout your nervous system when under threat. This is what triggers your survival instincts, your fight or flight response. However, like many neurological systems, the effect can wear down. The amygdala isn't going to keep telling you over and over again to be afraid of something if you're consistently remaining unharmed. This wearing down of fear being the base process that provides evidence to validate exposure therapy. Plenty of research has been done into the effectiveness of exposure therapy in tackling acute phobias. It's a simple solution to a complicated problem. Of course, the subtleties of individual experience could never really allow for the existence of a cure for fear, but this approach is one that has always fascinated me. Take this study from the Journal of Consulting and Clinical Psychology, 1999. As is most common in studies of fear, the subjects are a group of, in this case, 36 people who respond strongly to a specific kind of phobia. Something common and tangible, so it's easy to examine and record results in a controlled environment. Like spiders. Now, I too am familiar with that creeping sense of unease one might feel when they see a spider in the corner of their room before bed. I like to position myself as a lover of all animals, insects and arachnids completely included. They genuinely fascinate me. But I can't deny the subtle sense of dread I feel when I turn the light off and tuck myself in, knowing that somewhere in the room is a small predator. A hunter so keenly perfected by evolution that it has persisted for over 100 million years. Now, my rational brain knows that I won't accidentally eat it when I sleep, and there isn't a single spider where I live whose bite is as dangerous as being stung by a bee. But it could still happen. And I think that uncertainty is what makes us frightened. Not just with spiders, but with practically any animal. You never know what they're going to actually do. You're fully subject to the whims of their autonomy, something you can only guess at. You don't know when the wolves will attack, but you know that they're more than capable of doing so. This kind of fear is often considered a rational, ancient response from a time where a reliance on innate terror or disgust would help us survive. It's hardwired into our brains to be at least nervous of a lot of potential natural threats. That's why exposure therapy has so much data supporting it, because what it's doing is essentially rewiring the brain to register a different kind of reaction to a certain stimulus. Which, if you know anything about psychology, is not only pretty easy, but something psychologists have loved doing for a very long time. The study itself posits in an almost objective statement that of the 36 human participants, every single one would feel less afraid of spiders after just one session. However, there is something that a lot of these studies do which you don't often hear about. These studies don't always end with a bunch of people having a session of exposure therapy, then marking their results, going home and never being as scared of spiders again. Oh no. There's something else that happens after that. The return of fear is pretty self-explanatory. It prompts that without consistent exposure to the source of unease, people will just get scared again. The fear will inevitably come back. However, the key takeaway is that necessary circumstances of the experience have to be different. It'll be a different spider this time, one that you don't recognize. Instead of walking down an abandoned school hallway, you're lost in a subway station. There's now a different man hiding in your house. Of these 36 people, half were tested for the return of a greater fear 1 week later via a new context. Needless to say, the evidence spoke for itself. Those who experienced that new context ended up displaying a far greater return of fear than the ones that didn't. I imagine a lot of these participants are still very afraid of spiders. Obviously, undergoing therapy to remove a deep-seated fear won't make an extreme difference overnight, especially in a controlled setting. But the idea is that over time, that consistent and varied exposure has the end goal of achieving fear extinction, the complete removal of a fear response to certain stimulus, as was first documented in Pavlov's studies on classical conditioning. The results of this approach being extremely varied based on the source of fear, the individual experiencing it, the duration they felt it, and how deeply it impacts them. A hotly debated topic being whether these fears can be completely erased or just deeply inhibited. While those phobias that are most hindering to us tend to be brought about by events of severe trauma or an over-exacerbated natural response, the modern world has brought rise to an insidious new wave of fleeting frights that can open up new avenues of terror at a mere glance. Every corner of the internet, for instance. If you peel away at the epidermis of the now neutered, ad-friendly social media monopolies, you can find rich troves of niche horror. While the web has changed, if you know what you're looking for, it's still easy enough to find. So much of this content is hitting the web at such an overwhelming rate that if you peel back at the right corner, you might find something made so meticulously, painstakingly precise as to affect you in a way you wouldn't think it could affect anybody else. I, like a good deal of others, was initially very intrigued by the internet phenomenon of analog horror, which is the now massively popular genre based on retro found footage, usually looking like something recorded in the late 80s on the kind of handheld camcorder that would use a cassette deck. I'm the kind of person that deeply enjoys a lot of horror media. It can be a fascinating insight into our deepest vulnerabilities. Unpacking a particularly well-written horror story can have the same kind of emotional catharsis as crying at the end of a tragic romance novel. Often because good horror will tackle darker themes with metaphor and subtext that most other media won't touch without being extremely direct, and often in a way that would be far more visceral and upsetting. Not to mention the fascinating ways in which these different artists will creatively explore these often untouched aspects of humanity, using cinematography and abstract art to convey a level of emotional depth in a way that the written word would struggle to surmount. While this obviously wasn't the first time analog or found footage horror had made itself known, I was drawn to this new wave by the sheer immensity of it. It seemed that at almost every turn, there was a new lo-fi nightmare that had built up enough renown to not just get its own dedicated wiki, but to accumulate traction the likes of which I have existential nightmares about. Internet horror booms aren't uncommon, but I don't think I've seen one that's involved so many different and extremely popular projects before, many of these having multiple millions of views, which is astounding considering that the genre of horror overall is still relatively unpopular. There's a powerful effect that can emanate from a lot of these videos that can only be described as a creeping sense of uncertainty. Shots linger on for excruciatingly long seconds, often accompanied by the gentle buzz of static. It's something we're all familiar with, that feeling that someone is watching you in the dark. And I'll go out on a limb and say that the reason that the effect can be pulled off so well is the manipulation of the mundane and everyday. Think of it like this. You're an avid horror movie enthusiast who, for unrelated reasons, is going for a hike in the woods with an experienced friend. This is not your first trip. You know these woods. You're both fully confident in your route to know that you'll get to your cozy cabin destination before sundown. After seeing that one really weird tree that you used as a signpost on a previous hike, you take a rest for several minutes, and when you get back up, you've disoriented yourself. Unsure of which direction to continue, you trudge ever onwards, and for once, the certainty of your destination becomes a little less clear. Your friend makes a passing, jokey remark. "Let's just hope we don't run into the Blair Witch." The sun is setting on the horizon. Light fades faster as you journey on, and you feel your breaths begin to quicken. Subconsciously, you've picked up a more hurried pace in spite of your aching legs. Where you are right now in these woods is the last place you want to be. You feel seen, exposed, and worst of all, you feel pursued. As if darkness made manifest in the form of gripping vines and tendrils lick at your heels and the back of your neck, threatening to pull you away from your friend and into the dark. You want nothing more than to run. Realistically, you both make it out fine, but due to your understanding of the movie The Blair Witch Project, a found footage horror about people getting lost in the woods, you began to feel uneasy as soon as you noticed the darkness creeping across the forest floor. Whether that film took place in an entirely separate part of the world or not, for a brief moment, there was a crack in your reality that allowed its horror to seep through into this forest. And while some of my favorite horror films take place in these iconic and overpoweringly creepy locations, the purpose of this analog nightmare fuel isn't to make you afraid of some monster, but to make you afraid of every dark hallway in every dimly lit house. It's weaponizing your comfort of the familiar, which is a delightfully easy thing to do. Due to the lack of any budgetary restrictions for this kind of retro filming style, it makes it extremely accessible for any up-and-coming individual with a cheap camcorder and basic editing skills to just sort of experiment and upload the results onto YouTube. For instance, if I were to tint some footage, maybe posterize it, up the contrast, slap on a VHS or noise distortion overlay, start moving in an unnatural way, for hell of myself. That was a lot of fun. As a result, this small genre has been on a massive uptick on the internet over the past couple years. Therefore, it was only a matter of time before one of them wormed their way onto my browser. The Mandela Catalog, a series of tapes set in an alternate reality where, in Mandela County, strange beings known as alternates have begun to insidiously replace the population. Now, I was the only one of my immediate friends that was genuinely intrigued by this series. Only one other person I knew seemed to be that interested or find this new trend of smudge tool-faced people particularly scary. I did, and probably for some very specific reasons. Certain chemicals in my brain make me particularly susceptible to having visions at night, feeling things, hearing things. And I gotta tell you, whatever things live in the Mandela Catalog, they look a lot like the sort of things that my sleep-addled brain can conjure up from time to time. So naturally, I was intrigued. I wanted to find out more, so eventually me and that one other friend got together and watched the whole of what was then available of the Mandela Catalog. And it was fine. It was a cool premise for a spooky story, but I never found any of it particularly scary. So I tried another one, the Blue Channel. Again, it was mostly just a little unsettling. The third video was honestly pretty funny, and it felt like a genuine attempt to use the medium as a prop for some tongue-in-cheek comedy about an analog horror pharmaceutical drug, but it's not what I wanted. I wanted to be scared. I wanted to feel afraid and nervous. I wanted adrenaline pumping through me. I wanted to feel like I was beholden to truths unmeant for the human mind, so I decided to watch the Smile tapes. And what I saw brought me close to tears. I mean, it's completely ridiculous. Those faces look like what happens when memes get left out in the sun for too long. And I literally already made a joke of the "Do you dream this man" face earlier in this video. I don't understand anymore. Why do all of these have such meteoric traction, so much rabid attention, when they aren't fundamentally doing anything new and interesting with the medium of horror, and why am I still unable to sleep? If I can remain resolute and unfazed throughout the most lauded of these static-soaked simulacrums, what is it that's causing them to resurface in the dreaming hours? Clearly they can't be as ineffectual as I first assumed if, by the time I finish my nightly ablutions, knife-cut tension rattles me every moment my eyes rest on some indiscernible form in solid dark. For whatever reason, there was a still frame that I just couldn't get out of my head. This, right here, not because of the man that looks like if Wojak had been made into a creepypasta, no. It was just the presentation of the phrase, "an intruder." A harsh reality on a blistering white background. It didn't matter how ridiculous this person looked anymore, because now there was an established threat. He is in your house. He is waiting for you, and now, divorced from its original context, applied to a new situation, a new circumstance, and new conditions, the fear could return. Needless to say, I didn't sleep well that night. This isn't uncommon. I'm sure I'm not the only person that's seen a horror movie and thought, well, that wasn't scary. I've seen scarier things in my sleep. And then you try to go to sleep. That's what The Return of Fear is, really. Yes, maybe the movie didn't frighten you in the cinema. Maybe the spider wasn't as scary in a controlled environment. But now you're alone in your room in the dark, and you know a lot more about spiders than you did before. Our reactions to something scary can dictate a lot of different things in our lives. Our willingness to try something new, our independence, and how we tackle being alone. We sometimes need to confront those things many, many times in order to build up a resistance to it and feel more comfortable. In part, that's the reason why this kind of internet horror both does and does not work. There's an incredibly strong reaction to the initial scare, but the effect very quickly fades away because everything subsequent to that is restricted to the same context. Your resistances compound because the things designed to frighten you are fixed into a single medium. It is a YouTube video, it is an image. The circumstances from observing the first episode of an analog horror series aren't going to be any different from the final one. You can overcome the fear you feel directly towards this kind of media because they don't vary in perspective. It's like when you play a horror game and a fixed jump scare kills you. After even just the first or second time you experience it, the effect is already worn thin and tiresome because you know exactly what you're expecting. Now, compare that to something like Mr. X in the Resident Evil 2 remake, who, aside from a few fixed animations and canned sequences, is programmed to have a far more dynamic interaction with the player. You will eventually get less and less concerned by his presence the more you understand how he works, how to manipulate his pathing, how to escape from him hassle-free. He goes from being a terrifyingly lethal pursuer to just another stepping stone. While he might always make you uneasy, it's that gradual pushing of your boundaries that leads you to take action and make progress. But all that dynamism isn't exactly necessary if your goal is to just scare with a single image. The reason that only one picture of Jeff the Killer or Smile Dog or Momo or whatever became so viral is because they were just a single piece of visual media that people reacted very strongly to. There was nothing else to share, no other thing to be exposed to. Imagine if there were a dozen pictures, or even videos of Jeff the Killer, it just wouldn't work. I mean, there are hundreds of things like that now, fan art and fan-made games, all of which have resulted in a demystifying effect on what was at one point a rather prolific monolith of analog horror. The vast online presence of some of these things having the same effect as finding out the monster in your closet has an Instagram account. This exact thing actually did happen with someone I'm sure you're all very familiar with, Slenderman. He went from people thinking he was an actual, real-life urban legend to being plastered across the internet in so many different ways that he broke into the mainstream. He has a movie.
Who's Slenderman? Wait, he's the guy who makes all those kids disappear.
It's really bad. And because of things like this, I don't really think people are afraid of him anymore because there's no context left in which he's not been exposed to us in, so it's not really possible to make him scary again. You can't just recapture the experience of first reading about the uncannily human monster with no face. The process he went through is what's known as reverse ostension, defined by folklorist Jeffrey A. Tolbert in his 2013 article The Case of Slenderman as being a collective effort to remodel the narrative based on disconnected examples of experience, transforming him from a more traditional and concise modern folktale to a lore-heavy and overblown internet icon. The process of reverse ostension making his presence more well-known, but his meaning more vague. This is compounded by the fact that Slenderman's design and status positioned him as the ultimate other, the final evolution of radical alterity. He was known for being unknown, until everybody knew him. Another character that's been subject to the same kind of overexposure more recently is, of course, Siren Head. Created by the artist Trevor Henderson, Siren Head was never meant to be more than just another one of his creepy images. Henderson's particular forte being implanting creatively designed monsters onto real-life photographs, in an attempt to quite literally blur together reality and fiction. But for whatever reason, the internet latched on hard to this one character in particular, immediately making Siren Head videos, Siren Head games, top 10 scariest Siren Head moments, until it reached critical mass at such an immense speed that by the time I even knew how popular it had become, people were already fed up with it. I mean, when the Burger King foot fungus guy decides to make a rap about you, it can only kind of go downhill from there, right? Though it does seem as if the only way to truly nullify someone's irrational fear is for it to become a new wave of mimetic internet phenomena, eventually leading to its expression becoming more cartoonish than horrifying. But all of that internet nonsense does kind of ruin something, doesn't it? The return of fear is reliant on uncertainty, something that can't easily be washed away by the safety of a community, which is essentially what the internet makes of every flash-in-the-pan modern horror. These fears can enter a state of extinction so much more rapidly because entire online worlds form and crumble around every modern spooky monomyth at such a blisteringly fast speed that it's difficult to reflect and foster any kind of deeper feelings towards these things. It also doesn't help that a lot of them aren't actually that deep to begin with. Like I said earlier, Siren Head was just another cool design Trevor Henson did. It wasn't necessarily supposed to carry any deeper symbolism or thematic weight outside of what can be interpreted visually, though it could be said that that striking and simple to understand design is what made it take off so quickly in the first place. However, I'm never going to find Siren Head scary, or Momo, or the monsters in the back rooms, or whatever crawls out of the corners of internet fandom next. Because by the time I've heard of them, it's through the context of a meme, or someone telling me that they hate how much they've seen it. I feel like it's a lot harder to establish that personal connection with a lot of these things because of how quickly large communities latch onto them. In one sense, it is kind of wonderful seeing people bond over something that came from nowhere and has no major cultural significance, idolizing someone's art or scary story, even if they don't get it. It's clear that they still have a great appreciation for their work, which is always just pleasant. But I do miss it. That more personal horror. The kind that feels like it's conveying something just to me in the way that no other genre could ever do. The kind that rekindles those deep-seated fears buried since childhood so that they can be properly confronted. The kind like Skinamarink. Human beings have always been terrible at putting emotions into words. Unless you are exceedingly linguistically verbose in a multitudinous array of varying dialects, it's difficult to explain exactly how something can make you feel to an acute degree. The only way the fear imparted by Skinamarink can be appropriately explained is by comparing it to the sensation of being afraid and alone back when those concepts were completely alien to you. This is the feeling you get when you jolt awake from a nightmare while it's still dark out, and for a few minutes you're unsure if you're still dreaming. More importantly, you're unsure if you're still safe. That feeling, stretched out to the length of a feature film, employing the same tactics of analog internet horror to convey such disorienting strangeness, to invoke such crippling unease. And much like internet horror, the film was extremely low budget. The simplicity of the premise alone is something that hasn't left my mind. 2 children wake up in the middle of the night to find their father is missing, and all the windows and doors on their home have vanished. The windows and doors have what do you mean? It's a concept so perfectly simplistic that to employ any kind of spectacle or grandiosity would rob it of the thing that makes it terrifying. Pop. The windows and doors are gone. Don't think about it, just know that things are different now. You'll never know when dawn is, and you have to contend with whatever is living inside your house when you have no doors to hide behind. It's such a great concept that I've been thinking about it for weeks, and I haven't even seen the movie. That's right, I tricked you into assuming that everything I write about is something I've engaged with to the full extent, but the thing is, I don't believe I even have to have watched this movie to have a deep and profound game of mental chess that makes me so scared. I know this film will get to me. I might not be scared while I watch it, hell, I might find it boring, but I know my brain well enough to know that if I do expose myself to its full runtime, do reveal every monster hiding under the bed, I won't sleep well for months. And you might think to yourself, why? Wasn't the whole point of this video discussing media that affects you in such a powerful way that it revisits you every night, valuing the return of fear as a key component to its ultimate extinction? Yes, it is. But it's also about knowing how to properly consume that media to strengthen your conviction. Be scared. Being scared is good. It's healthy to gently push the boundaries of comfort, but for the love of God, do not expose yourself to anything that might compromise your mental health. For people like me with the problems I got, it can be a difficult line to straddle, but it's so important to know your limits. You will not overcome that fear of spiders by throwing yourself face first into their nest. Horror can do a lot of fascinating things to the mind. A rush of adrenaline, a jolt of paranoia, a steady dose of uncertainty. And the human mind will probably never be free of it. There will always be something to worry about. The world is a big, complicated, and oftentimes frightening place. Fear will always return in some form or another, at some moment or another. And having the experience to understand and deal with it, well, it just makes getting on with your life so much easier. Now, I don't know if exposure therapy works, and I'm not going to stake my word that an individual with any kind of anxiety ever try it without consulting a professional. But I will encourage what it attempts to do. Push outward. That doesn't mean do a bunch of things you hate for the sake of the experience because it builds character. No, it means really come to terms with what it is that makes you uncomfortable. Establish where your boundaries are and how comfortable you are with stepping beyond them. I feel like the value of engaging with horror is understated, and at the very least, not allowing yourself the freedom to experience the stories people have to tell through their art, whether it be a genuinely frightening, life-altering experience or just a fun, silly experiment is, well, I just don't want people to miss out. There's some amazing things you can find out there, and trust me, sometimes it's worth a few sleepless nights. Oh boy, did this one take a lot longer to make than I thought it was gonna. Anyway, if you watched this whole thing, thank you very, very much. That's what makes it all worthwhile. Feel free to do all the social media things if you like. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Love and peace.